My name's Ellis Rourke. After 20 years building that company from the ground up, they called me too old and shoved me aside like I never mattered. The betrayal didn't come with yelling. It came in silence, in erased reports and stolen credit. I could have walked away quietly. Instead, I stood up and I spoke. If you've ever been pushed out of somewhere you gave your heart to, listen through to the end, then tell me, was I right to fight back? Would you have done the same? I remember the wind that morning more than anything else. March 12th. No rain, no sunshine. Just that steady, stubborn wind blowing across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot I'd walked through nearly every weekday for the last 20 years. It pressed against my coat like a hand nudging me back toward the car. I should have known then. That morning wasn't different, not at first. I parked in my usual spot, third row from the east fence, under the rusted-out floodlight that never worked right in winter. Slid my thermos into my jacket pocket and headed in. Same lobby smell, burnt coffee and industrial carpet. Same nod from Judy at reception, polite but perfunctory. She didn't make eye contact. I stepped into the elevator alone, which used to feel like a break. That day, it felt like being left behind. The door slid open to the 5th floor. Engineering and project oversight. My floor. There's a quiet in technical offices most people don't understand. It's not peaceful. It's sterile. Humming from old servers, faint clicks of keyboards, soft groans from ductwork. I passed 3 junior engineers who didn't look up. One was the kid they just hired, fresh out of college, still wearing loafers that squeak on the tile. He nodded, but his eyes went back to his screen too quick. I reached my desk. Same seat. Same photos of my wife and our son in uniform. Same half-dead fern my wife insisted made the space more human. For a second, I let myself believe everything was still in place. Then Braden's voice cracked through the intercom. Ellis, can you step into my office? No, please. No explanation. Just my name and his clipped, brisk tone. Like he was ordering a latte, not summoning a man who'd helped build half this company's infrastructure. I set down my thermos, adjusted my collar, and walked the 20 feet to his corner office. Braden Moffat, 39 maybe. Clean haircut, always just a little too much cologne. He likes slim suits and speaking in half-formed buzzwords. Iterate. Optimize. Disrupt. Son of the founder. He'd taken over 3 years earlier when his father retired. And ever since then, Stonebridge Design was less about structures and more about image. He didn't look up when I walked in, just gestured toward the chair across from him and clicked through a few slides on his laptop. Morning, I said, keeping my voice even. He finally glanced up. Ellis. Hey, listen, quick thing. We've got that Riverstone housing proposal moving forward. I nodded. Yeah. I've been prepping soil analysis. Should be ready for first phase review next week. He shook his head, almost like a reflex. Right, so we're actually pivoting a little. We've decided to let Alec take point on this one. Young energy, you know? Fresh perspective. Trying out some more agile dynamics. Hope you're okay with that. I stared at him. Not angrily. Just long enough for the silence to feel uncomfortable. I wanted to ask if he really thought agile dynamics meant anything in the context of foundation engineering. But I didn't. Instead, I said, that used to be my scope. He smiled like I just told a quaint story. Yeah, I know. And you've laid a great groundwork, no pun intended. But we're shifting a bit. You'll still be looped in for consults, of course. Looped in. Consults. I didn't say another word. Just nodded, stood up, and walked back to my desk. My legs moved on their own, but my stomach had gone hollow. The hallway suddenly felt colder. I sat down, opened my drawer, and stared at the old notebook I kept for quick sketches and job site notes. There were sketches in there from the first shopping center we built in Claremont County. Projects that wouldn't have met code if I hadn't redlined the plans myself on a Sunday afternoon. But none of that was in the room today. Just this strange sensation. Like someone had quietly folded a corner of my life and started erasing it without telling me. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling tiles, listening to the soft whir of the HVAC. A line popped into my head, something my father used to say when people were trying to push him aside. They're not saying you're done. They're just hoping you'll believe it before they have to admit it. That day, it hit different. For a while, I thought maybe I could just ride it out. Keep my head down, do the work no one else wanted. But something about the way Braden had looked at me, like I was furniture that didn't match the room anymore, lit a fuse I didn't know I had left. I thought I'd learned how to endure. I thought I'd mastered the quiet. But that day, when Braden said what he said, I realized this wasn't a job anymore. It was an eviction. And they just hadn't bothered to change the locks yet. There's a strange kind of memory that sticks to you, not because it was dramatic or loud, but because it was honest. I still remember the day Victor Moffat, Braden's father, leaned against the railing on the third-floor balcony and offered me the position of lead structural engineer. He didn't smile much, but that day he gave me a short nod and said, "You don't speak unless you've thought it through." I trust that. That stuck with me. It meant something then. That was 17 years ago. We were still in the old building, the one with the flickering lights in the stairwell and a vending machine that ate your quarters. The company was smaller, tighter, more human. I was 39, with more calluses than gray hairs, and I believed that showing up every day and doing the right thing still counted for something. The morning after Braden passed me over on the Riverstone project, I showed up like usual. But something was off, right from the start. There was a team meeting at 9 a.m., one of those Monday sync-ups the younger guys like to run. I checked my inbox. No invite. No summary. Just silence. I double-checked the room calendar. My name was no longer listed under core review. That had never happened before. I walked down to the print room, expecting the draft specs for the foundation evaluation to be waiting in my box. Empty. Someone else's blueprints sat where mine used to. I stood there for a moment, trying not to let my hands ball into fists. It's a strange thing, realizing you've been erased. They didn't move my desk. They didn't take my name off the door. But every channel, every loop, every thread, they'd shut me out without saying a word. I tried focusing on a different task. Safety report reviews. Soil compaction logs from the east side of town. But my eyes kept drifting to the empty inbox and the absence of notifications. The office felt louder, somehow. More footsteps, more chuckles from the young guys in marketing, more tapping from keyboards that weren't typing my name into anything. At lunch, I grabbed my coat and headed for Jubilee Grounds. It was a corner cafe 2 blocks south, tucked between a florist and a dry cleaner, with wood-framed windows and that faint smell of cinnamon always hanging in the air. I'd been going there for years, back when Milton Hesse and I used to draw sketches on napkins and argue over beam loads. I didn't expect to see him there that day. He was at the back, by the window, hunched slightly like he always had, stirring a cup of tea he'd probably let go cold. He looked up as I approached, and that grin of his, half amusement, half weariness, greeted me like no time had passed at all. "Ellis," he said, tapping the chair across from him. I figured it was just a matter of time. We didn't waste words. We never did. "You hear something?" I asked, settling into the seat. "I see things," he replied. "And I've been you before." Milton had walked out of the company 3 years ago. No dramatic farewell, no email blast. Just gone one day. I remembered thinking back then that it didn't make sense. He had seniority, vision, loyalty. He also had the nerve to question Braden's plans. And that's what got him silently phased out. "You're not getting copied on reports anymore," he said plainly. "No," I replied. "They cancel your meeting invites." I nodded. Milton leaned back and exhaled through his nose. "That's how they do it now. They don't fire you with paperwork. They fire you with silence." I stared at the foam on my coffee. That line sank deeper than I expected. Not because it was poetic, but because it was true in the dullest, most corporate way possible. "They put a kid named Alec in charge of Riverstone," I said. Milton's brow lifted. "Alec Donnell?" "Yeah." He shook his head slowly, like someone watching a car speed toward a wall. "He used to be at Sklar Buildworks. They got flagged 2 years ago for skipping geotechnical testing. Lost their license for 6 months." I blinked. Braden handed him one of our biggest residential builds. "They're playing with fire, Ellis," Milton said. "They're betting on speed. They know you'd pump the brakes." I let the silence settle between us. The buzz of the espresso machine, a spoon clinking against a ceramic mug, the hum of voices fading into background noise. All of it hung there while I absorbed the shape of what was happening. It wasn't just age. It wasn't about fresh energy. They weren't trying to move forward. They were trying to move past me. Because I stood in the way of shortcuts they didn't want called out. I looked at Milton. "You think I should just walk out?" "No," he said, with a firmness I didn't expect. "Not without deciding what you want that walk to mean." The air in that conference room was always a few degrees too cold. Something about the HVAC vents, positioned directly over the middle seats, no matter how many times folks complained. I used to joke that it was the company's way of keeping tempers down. That morning, it didn't work. 1 week after my conversation with Milton, I was seated at the far end of a long rectangular table, across from Braden and 2 of his new hires, kids still green behind the ears, but sharp with numbers and slick with presentation slides. Alongside them sat a rep from the city planning office, a man in a navy blazer who kept adjusting his glasses like they weren't quite comfortable on his face. It was a meeting about Riverstone, the high-density housing development Braden had put Alec in charge of. I wasn't supposed to speak. That much was clear from the moment the agenda hit the screen. But when the slide showed soil conditions for Parcel B, something in me shifted. I leaned forward. "There's a water table under that quadrant," I said. "If they don't account for it, you're going to see settlement within the first 2 years. Cracks in the foundation. Maybe worse." Braden didn't even let the city rep respond. "That's outdated thinking, Ellis," he said, his tone clipped. "We've already adjusted with new metrics. Let's not slow the room down." Slow the room down. He said it like I was some old refrigerator humming too loud in the corner. I looked around the table. No one said a word, not even a glance in my direction. The city rep scribbled something onto his legal pad, but I couldn't read his face. I sat back and folded my hands. It was the first time in 2 decades anyone had dismissed me in front of an external partner. Not disagreed, dismissed. And I knew then it wasn't a lapse in manners. It was calculated. Braden wanted me quiet, not just removed from projects, erased from the conversation. When the meeting wrapped, I stood up slower than usual. Part of me wanted to walk out and keep walking, past the cubicles, past the glass doors, right out into the sun and never look back. But instead, I followed Braden down the hall. He motioned for me to step into his office, and I did, though something in my gut had already drawn the outline of what was coming. He closed the door, but didn't sit. "You've done your time here," he said. "Nobody's questioning that. But let's be honest, you don't fit anymore. It's time we talk about your exit." Just like that. No warning. No performance review. No cause. Just a clean hand pushing the past out the back door. I didn't speak right away. I looked around the room. The sleek desk. The awards on the shelf that still bore Victor Moffat's name, though Braden never once mentioned him. The framed rendering of a high-rise they'd never get the zoning for. Finally, I said, "You may be the boss, but this place still carries my work in every corner. Don't forget that." He smiled like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. I walked out. Not out of the building, just back to my desk. But I left something behind in that office. Not pride, not ego, something older. My illusion. The last thread of belief that this company remembered what it was built on. That night, I drove home with both windows down, even though it was barely 50 degrees. I needed air, real air. Something unfiltered, uncoordinated, unscripted. When I got home, my wife was reading in the den. She didn't ask how my day went. She just looked at me like she already knew. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out my old Bible. Not the leather one we kept on the shelf, but the paperback I used to carry on job sites when weather delays ran long. Inside, a line was underlined in blue ink, faded from age. "A wise man builds his house upon the rock." I had my keys in hand, half turned toward my truck, when I heard it, my name. Soft. Almost like a second thought. "Mr. Rourke?" I turned around slowly. Donnie was standing maybe 15 feet away, under the shadow of the building. He had one hand stuffed deep in his jacket pocket, the other awkwardly holding a folder like he didn't know where to put it. His sneakers were scuffed, and his eyes kept darting toward the security camera over the side door. I hadn't seen him in weeks. Not since they started keeping me out of meetings. He took a step closer. "I've been meaning to catch you," he said, voice low, like he was afraid someone else might hear. Just hadn't worked up to it yet. I studied his face. Nervous, but not unsure. He knew what he was doing. "What's on your mind?" I asked, staying by the truck, not moving toward him. He looked over his shoulder. Then another step closer. They're editing your reports," he said. "The Riverstone ones. Last quarter's geotech logs. Alex changing the tolerances. Rewriting the comments. It's being pushed under archive discrepancies in the system." I didn't say anything, just stared at him. He went on. "They're making it look like you missed some load limit flags. Most people wouldn't catch it, but I worked off your notes before. I remember them." Still, I said nothing. I just felt something inside me slow down. Like the part of my brain that normally tries to make excuses or find a misunderstanding. It just stopped. Sat down. Went quiet. "They told you to do it?" I asked finally. He shook his head, fast. "No. I swear." Alec pushed the changes. "But the metadata on the approval, it shows Braden signed off." That part didn't surprise me as much as it hurt. Because even though I knew who Braden was, even though I'd watched him hollow out the company from the inside, there was still a part of me, somewhere buried, that hoped maybe I was wrong about him. That maybe I was just old. In the way. Misreading it. I wasn't. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Donnie's face tightened. He looked down, then up again. "Because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you," he said. "You're the only one who ever explained the why. Not just the what. You taught me to double-check everything. You gave a damn. And I can't be part of what they're doing." I nodded slowly. Not out of gratitude. Just acknowledgement. There wasn't much else to say. I patted the side of my truck once, just to have something to do with my hand, and told him I appreciated it. That night, I met Milton again. Same spot at Jubilee Grounds. Same booth in the back. The place was nearly empty. Just a couple grading papers at the window and a girl reading a novel at the bar. Milton was already there, cradling a cup of tea like it was older than both of us. He barely looked up as I slid into the seat across from him. I told him what Donnie said. Every word. He didn't flinch. "They want you to walk out bitter," he said quietly, and discredited. That way, if anything collapses down the road, they've got a clean narrative. He took a sip. "And if you leave without saying anything, they write the ending. Not you." That line stuck in my chest like a nail. I stirred my coffee, though I hadn't added anything to it, and watched the swirl disappear. It wasn't the confrontation that scared me. I'd worked on job sites where inspectors screamed across muddy fields. I'd dealt with clients in suits yelling about change orders they didn't understand. Conflict didn't scare me. What scared me was retiring into silence, letting them carve my name into a mistake I didn't make, and walking away without ever setting the record straight. I looked up. "What would you do?" Milton didn't answer right away. He never did. Then he said, soft but certain, "There's a difference between leaving and escaping. Make sure you're doing one, not the other." I drove home without turning on the radio. Just the quiet hum of the tires, the dashboard lights, and the tick of the turn signal when I didn't need it. Inside, I slipped off my coat and stepped into the half bath down the hall. I flicked on the light and looked at myself in the mirror. Not tired, not weak, but worn. Like something that had held more weight than it was meant to. Something that still held its shape, but not without scars. I leaned in closer. "I've never raised my voice in that company," I said to my own reflection. "But maybe it's time they finally hear it." The man in the mirror didn't argue. I didn't want revenge. But I wasn't going to leave quiet either. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. Just lay there with my back pressed into the mattress, like I was trying to disappear into it. The ceiling fan above ticked slightly with every rotation, humming like an old appliance that's seen better days. I focused on the sound, hoping it might carry me somewhere quieter inside my own head. It didn't. Two voices kept circling me like buzzards. One said, "Let it go." Walk away. You've done your time. There's dignity in knowing when to leave. You're not 25 anymore. You don't need the noise. The other voice wasn't louder, but it sat heavier. It said, if not you, then who? You know what's happening. If you walk now, they get to rewrite the ending and put your name on it. What does that teach the ones still watching? I lay there until the digital clock beside the bed blinked 3:15 in soft red digits. My wife was asleep, steady breath rising and falling beside me. I didn't want to wake her, but something pulled at me, deep, urgent. Like a dog that hears something under the porch before anyone else does. I slipped out of bed, threw on an old sweatshirt, and padded down the hallway barefoot. The floor was cold, even through the socks I'd forgotten to take off. I stepped into the garage and flipped on the light, low, yellow, slightly buzzing from a loose ballast. The metal drawers stood against the far wall. Rusted handles, paint chipped from years of reaching, opening, closing. I hadn't touched those files in a long time, but muscle memory guided me. Second drawer from the bottom, labeled Riverstione in faded Sharpie. I pulled out the folders, laid them across the workbench, and opened the most recent set of files I'd downloaded from the office server. I'd done it quietly during my last week when I still had access. Old habits die hard. One by one, I lined up the plans. My versions. Theirs. Soil load tolerances, raised 8%. No additional notes to justify the change. Compaction ratings, language softened, as if uncertainty was just another type of efficiency. Warning flags, gone. Risk buffers, shrunk to near zero. My eyes scanned each page until they found what they were looking for. File modified by A. Donnell. Approved by B. Moffett. There it was. Like initials carved into the underside of a desk, left by someone who thought no one would ever look there. Except I did. I stared at those names a long time. Not because I was shocked. I wasn't. Not anymore. What I felt was something closer to grief. Even after all the meetings, all the shut doors, all the polite exclusions, I'd still held out hope that maybe, just maybe, I was being paranoid. That there was a reason I'd been pushed aside. Maybe I really was out of date. But this wasn't new vision. It was cowardice in a tailored suit. I sat back on the old wooden stool and looked down at the plan sheets spread out like an autopsy. My name was still there, printed neatly in the top right corner. Engineer of record. That was the cruelest part. They didn't even bother to take it off. Just rewrote around it. I thought that was the worst of it. But then I clicked into the shared contractor folders. I still had admin access, a leftover from the early days when I'd helped build the damn file structure. Buried 3 layers deep was a PDF, dated 2 weeks prior. Title, Change Order, Riverstone Phase 1. I opened it. Inside was a signed subcontractor agreement between the company and a third-party contractor I'd never heard of. No vetting, no safety records, no license verification. Just a signature from Braden at the bottom. The scope of work, expedited groundwork. Material substitutions allowed. Inspection listed as verbal confirmation only. No mention of geotechnical approval. No state compliance checks. No eyes on it, but that was it. That's why they needed me gone. I'd never have let it through. I stood there, hands on the edge of the workbench, head hanging low. They weren't just cutting corners. They were gutting the foundation, literally and metaphorically, hoping the building would stay up long enough to sell, then letting gravity do the rest. And me? I was the safety net, the name to blame when it all came down. I felt my jaw tighten. My hands shook a little, not with rage, but with clarity. I opened my laptop and started building a side-by-side. Original specs, altered versions, change orders, approval trails. I screen captured everything, backed it up to a drive I kept in a drawer marked taxes. I wrote the observations like a report. No emotion, no commentary, just data. Let the facts speak where people hadn't. I could hear Milton's voice again in the back of my mind. Don't bring a hammer when a flashlight will do. Shine the light. Let the truth crawl out on its own. When the sun started bleeding through the garage windows, my fingers were cramping. My eyes burned. I'd written 17 pages of documentation and bound 3 identical copies. One for internal records, one for the city, one for myself. I set them aside and went inside. Showered, shaved, ironed a fresh shirt, cleaned the boots I hadn't worn since last fall, polished the name badge that was probably going in a drawer by tomorrow night. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel angry. I just felt ready. The quarterly review was tomorrow morning. Braden would be there. The directors. The engineers. A dozen people who'd stopped meeting my eyes in the hall. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just needed to tell the truth while it still had my name on it. The boardroom was colder than usual, even for early morning. Someone had left the blinds half open, so light cut across the table in uneven strips. There were 12 of us in the room. Give or take. I'd sat through more of these quarterly technical reviews than I could count, but this one didn't feel like the others. I walked in with my folders tucked under one arm. No laptop. No water bottle. No coffee. Just paper hardbound, printed in black and white. What I'd always trusted more than pixels. Braden was already seated at the head of the table. He didn't look at me, just kept scrolling on his tablet while muttering something to Alec. I took my seat quietly. Waited. The meeting started with the usual updates. Site progress reports. Safety metrics. Marketing's latest pitch language for the Riverstone rollout. Numbers. Projections. Nothing said out loud about foundations or soil or structural compliance. Then my name was called. Not by Braden. By a junior project manager who sounded like he wasn't sure if I was even still employed. I stood up, laid the folders on the table, and opened the first one in front of me. I'll keep this brief, I said. I know time's tight. No one objected, but a few brows raised. Braden leaned back, arms crossed. I've compared the original structural specs for the Riverstone development, my drafts, with the modified documents currently active on the server. The differences aren't clerical. They're critical. I opened the folder, showing the highlighted variances. Compaction rates. Water table clearance. Margin of error shrinkage. Not only were these changed without any geotechnical retesting, but they were also filed under my name. Someone coughed at the far end of the table. I kept going. Additionally, I found a signed subcontract agreement with MTC Groundworks. No prior vetting, no recorded inspection, and no compliance documentation for state-level approvals. This document was signed by Mr. Moffat. Now the silence thickened. Braden finally spoke, voice smooth, dismissive. Ellis, this feels a lot like a reaction to a shift in roles. Let's be honest, you haven't been central to this project in months. We respect what you've built here, but this kind of pushback sounds personal. I nodded once. I understand how it looks. Then I picked up the comparison report and slid it halfway across the table toward him. But the question isn't whether I feel left out. The question is whether what I'm saying is true. A few heads turned toward the documents. I saw Donnie near the back, jaw tight, eyes flicking between Braden and the paper. One of the senior design engineers leaned forward, scanned a section, and stopped when he saw the initials, confirming who'd made the changes. Braden's fingers tapped the edge of his tablet. He didn't speak. I looked around the room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't deliver a speech. I just said calmly, clearly, this is my last day here. But if this project goes ahead with these foundations, it won't be the company's last mistake. It'll be its last breath. No one clapped. This wasn't a movie. But something changed in that room. Not in Braden, he was too far gone, but in the people watching. They'd seen enough. They'd heard enough. I didn't wait to be asked to leave. I went back to my desk, slowly, methodically. I took down the photo of my wife and our son, the one from his graduation in dress blues. I unplugged the desk lamp I'd brought in from home, folded my old project notes into a small box. No announcement, no goodbye email, just movement. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed Donnie. He stood up, didn't say a word, just held out his hand. I shook it. Then 2 more hands. Then another. No speeches. Just the quiet kind of respect you don't have to earn twice. Downstairs, the lobby looked the same as it always had. Judy gave me a long look, but said nothing. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she did. It didn't matter. The door opened. I stepped outside. The wind was light this time, barely there. And my feet felt like they weren't walking out of something broken. They were walking toward something that might just hold. 1 week out felt like a month. I thought I'd feel aimless, like a man put out to pasture. But the first few mornings surprised me. No alarm clock. Just sunlight coming in sideways through the bedroom curtains and the slow rhythm of a house that wasn't rushing toward anything. I started walking the neighborhood after breakfast. Hands in my pockets, hood pulled up against the chill. I'd nod at familiar faces I'd never had time to speak to, neighbors I'd lived next to for years but never really met. It was strange, being home during hours I used to reserve for job sites, reports, and endless revisions. Even stranger was sitting at the breakfast table with my wife on a Tuesday morning, watching her stir sugar into her coffee like it was a ceremony. We went out twice that week. Just the two of us. No celebration, no agenda. I realized I'd spent so long chasing deadlines that I forgot what it felt like to let a day unfold. Still, under all that quiet, something in me was waiting. Like my mind hadn't fully accepted that I was done with that place. Then, midweek, I got the email. Subject line: Opportunity, Community Housing Project. It was from Linda Haskell. We'd worked together over a decade ago, back when Halden Creek was still a scrappy little firm doing municipal builds on modest budgets. She ran a tight ship. No fluff, no ego. Just cared about things being done right and done with care. Ellis, the message read, "We're opening a proposal for a renovation initiative in Montgomery. Low-income housing. High-impact project. Our team could use a seasoned eye, someone who knows how to make things last. Would you consider consulting?" I stared at that message longer than I needed to. I wasn't shocked she remembered me. But something about being asked, being wanted, not out of loyalty or pity, but because my work still held weight, it did something to me. Like taking a deep breath after holding one too long. I wrote back with a short yes. 2 days later, I saw the article in the city paper. Nothing flashy. Just a corner column in the Cincinnati Ledger's infrastructure beat. Riverstone project paused for foundation review. The wording was cautious. Corporate. But I read between the lines. Substandard fill materials. Inconsistent soil compaction logs. Discrepancies in structural documentation. The article stopped short of assigning blame. But it mentioned the contractor by name. And it cited an anonymous internal report. I didn't need confirmation. I knew who sent it. Donnie. He didn't do it for me. He did it because he still believed the truth should mean something. Because I taught him not to stay silent when something felt wrong. And in the end, he'd made his choice. Later that evening, I checked my inbox again. A message from Braden. Subject line: Congratulations. I opened it. You got what you wanted. You ruined our momentum. That was all it said. No greeting. No signature. Just that single line. Cold clipped, like he was still pretending to be the adult in the room. I didn't reply. I didn't show it to anyone. I didn't even mention it to my wife. I just printed it on cheap paper, folded it down the middle, wrote the date in blue ink, and filed it away in the cabinet with my old building permits and licenses. Not as evidence. Not out of spite. Just to remind myself, years from now, what pride looks like when it forgets the ground it's standing on. The following Monday, I stepped into Halden Creek's office. No glass walls. No motion sensor lights. The place smelled like fresh drywall and old paper. It was the kind of environment where people actually built things, not just approved things. Where your name didn't have to be on the wall to matter. They brought me into a modest conference room. Round table, scuff chairs, a whiteboard covered in measurements and red arrows. A half circle of junior engineers sat around a projected site model, debating angle tolerances and load paths. They were bright-eyed, fresh, unpolished. I didn't interrupt, just listened. After the meeting wrapped, one of them, a tall kid with hair too long for fieldwork, turned to me and asked, "Mr. Rourke, if you could give just one piece of advice to someone starting out, what would it be?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to say it right. So I looked at him, and I said, that you don't owe your silence to people who profit from it. He didn't write it down. He didn't nod. He just stared at me for a moment, like something had landed where it needed to. We moved on after that. Talked rebar, seismic stress, thermal drift, nothing fancy, just the bones of real buildings. And as I sat there, surrounded by people who asked questions without fear and built things without shortcuts, I felt it. Peace. Not because I'd won anything, but because I'd finally stopped pretending that staying quiet was the same thing as being loyal. And in that room, with those young voices and old plans, I realized something I hadn't said out loud until then. I didn't lose anything that mattered. I just finally set it down. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and a little bit of wood polish. Morning light poured in through the window over the sink, casting long, soft shadows across the floor. Outside, the trees were just starting to turn. Reds, golds, and that quiet kind of brown that says fall's here for real. I stood there in my flannel shirt, pouring a cup with the same rhythm I'd used for years. One scoop too much, always, because I like it strong. I brought the mug over to the old chair by the window, the one with the worn arms and a faint squeak when you settle into it. I didn't mind the squeak. It let me know I was still here. On the table beside me sat a small Bible, dog-eared, pages thinning at the edges. I opened it slowly. Tucked inside was a note, folded once, handwriting I knew by heart. You don't have to carry everything alone. The Lord sees. She'd left it for me a few months back, during a week when I wasn't talking much. When I'd come home each night and just sat in silence. I didn't respond to the note then, but I'd kept it. And this morning, it felt like a benediction. For the first time in a long while, my chest didn't feel tight. I took a slow sip of coffee, let the heat settle in, and leaned back. Later that day, I saw the article. It wasn't front page, just a small blurb buried in the business section of a local paper. But the headline was enough. Major development project halted amid structural concerns. The piece was careful, no finger-pointing. Said the Riverstone project had lost its primary investor. City was re-evaluating permits. Sources claimed leadership changes were underway. Braden's name wasn't mentioned directly, but a follow-up piece 2 days later noted that the company's board had accepted a senior-level resignation. No protests, no press conference, just a quiet dismantling of what used to be a company. It collapsed the way it had operated those last few years, silent, sharp, and with very few looking up to see it happen. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was simpler. Relief. I wasn't there when it fell. I didn't have to carry it anymore. I'd already set it down. I think that mattered more than anything. I still remember the weight of my last day. That final walk through the office, the box under my arm, the faces I passed, some grateful, some nervous, some pretending I wasn't there. But I walked out with my spine straight and my silence broken. And that's not nothing. Not long after, I was standing by the window at Halden Creek, looking out at one of our new projects, a modest site with real bones to it. Nothing flashy, just something solid, something that would last. A group of young engineers were on the lot, learning how to survey a line without relying on GPS. One of them, Donnie, looked up at me from a field and waved. Later, inside, he stepped up beside me and said, "I get it now. Why you never cut corners." I didn't turn to look at him. Just watched the crew as they checked their levels and plotted their marks. Because if you cut enough of them, I said, soon there's nothing left to stand on. He nodded, said nothing else. And I appreciated that. I left the office a little after noon. Walked the 2 blocks to Jubilee Grounds like I used to. They'd changed the menu chalkboard, but the smell was the same. Cinnamon and espresso and something warm beneath it. When it was my turn, the young woman behind the counter asked, "Name for the cup?" I smiled. "Ellis," I said, spelled the old-fashioned way. She nodded, wrote it down, and handed me the receipt. I found a quiet table near the back, where the light came in just right. Pulled out my notebook and clicked my pen. The first page was blank, but that didn't bother me. I wrote the first line for the workshop I'd be teaching next week. Do it right, not because someone's watching. Do it right because you have to live in what you build. Then I set the pen down, took a sip, and watched the steam curl into the air. Maybe you've been there too, watching something you built get taken from you quietly, not with a bang, but with a silence that cuts deeper than words. If this story felt close to something in your own life, I hope it reminded you that standing up for your worth doesn't always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just refusing to disappear. You don't have to explain your value to those who stop seeing it, but you owe it to yourself to never forget it. If this story stayed with you, I'd be grateful to have you here again next time for another quiet conversation, one heart to another.